Sports Talk New York with your hosts Mark Rosenman and AJ Carter. Sports Talk New York is sponsored in part by Prince Associates, Cardboard Memories, the Phoenix Tube Company, Matt Giuliano's Play Like a Pro Baseball, the law firm of Decolator, Cohen & DeBrisco, Solomon Jewelers, and Relish Restaurant of Kings Park. Here are your hosts, Mark and AJ.
Good evening, Mr. McLain. How are you?
Good evening. How is everybody tonight?
Very good. I just want to, first of all, wish you a happy holiday. And
thank you very much. My best to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to start out by thanking you for your time tonight, because one of the main reasons that I personally wanted you on our show, is after reading your book, I was so impressed by your total, unflinching honesty in the book. You know, a lot of athletes today sugarcoat things. You were right out there. While I was reading it, I just want to know, did writing the book serve as like some sort of therapy for you?
Well, it certainly was. Not only that, it allowed me to express myself, number one. Number two, it allowed me to detail some things that no one had ever known before or heard before. And, we wrote the book from the point of view that we were able to prove everything we said. That was the most important thing. I mean, it became our kind of a Bible, in a sense that all of this time that the book has been out now, since April, not one person in the government, out of the government, one player, one commissioner, or anybody else, no one has ever said the book was not the truth. And I think that speaks volumes of the integrity of the book and the veracity by which we wrote it.
Yeah, I tell you, it was an amazing read. I had actually heard you on Ed Randolph's Talking Baseball, and I was so impressed. I was so impressed. I actually went out that day, bought the book, and I'm like not one of those type of readers that will stay with the book like the same day. I finished the book in a day and a half. I was just blown away by it. You touch on your early childhood in your book and your dad's verbal and physical abuse, but you also mentioned how he rearranged his work schedule around your games and practices, and you would have never been a baseball player without him. How would you like the world to remember your dad, Tom McLain?
Well, Tom was a very complex man, yet very simple in the sense that he was a very responsible guy in such a contradiction. He was such a responsible guy in one sense. He had two jobs, moved us out of the city of Chicago, which was becoming a dangerous place, out to the suburbs, did all the right things to build a house, responsibly he was just overwhelming. And then there was the other side of Tom, that my dad was an alcoholic, irresponsible in the sense that he never came quite straight home. It's not he wasn't with women, but he was just he'd stop at the local VFW, would stop at the local Legion Hall, and they'd have a couple of drinks, and sooner or later you didn't know who was coming through the door. So on this one hand, he was unbelievably responsible. On the other side, he was irresponsible. But he cared about his family. A great deal. The only problem that we had with him, of course, was his anger. And when his anger got out of control, you had to duck and you hoped that you weren't around when it happened.
He did install an incredible work ethic in you, though. You talk about about your practicing the piano and your grades and baseball. So I'm glad you got to tell the world, about the good parts of him as well in the book.
Sure, of course.
A lot of people, that don't know the history about you might not know that you were offered the first baseball scholarship from Notre Dame. Have you ever wondered?
Sure was. I was offered the first baseball scholarship Notre Dame was ever going to offer. I went to Mount Carmel High School, which was kind of at the time in the early 60s, late 50s, it was almost a preparatory school for Notre Dame. Big Irish Catholic school run by the Carmelites. They beat you up pretty good, too, if you stepped on a line. And the bottom line was they worked with Notre Dame very closely. A lot of the football coaches went to Notre Dame. A lot of them wound up in the NFL because of Notre Dame. And they came to me and offered me the first baseball scholarship. And unfortunately, the White Sox and the Yankees came along, offered me $10,000, actually $17,500 apiece. And it looked like $28 million at the time. So we look back on Notre Dame and say, geez, it's one of those things they wish he had done. But, on the other hand, I'd have probably never won 30 either. So life is a trade-off, and no one knows that more than I do.
You were also a good shoemaker away from being a New York Yankee. Could you tell our listeners about the story, and why do you recall that so vividly?
Well, my mother was a Polish Jew, and my mother just died about 3 years ago, which makes me obviously a Polish Jew. She married an Irishman, my father. So we really had a house in conflict. We had an Irish father, we had a Polish Jewish mother, and it was a crazy house. If nothing else, I had all the holidays off, man, and there were a lot of them. The bottom line was my mother coming from the old country with her mother. One of the things in the old country was that everybody wanted shoes all the time, especially during World War II, and very few people had new shoes all the time in World War II. So that was a big thing with my mother, and in walked the Yankee Scout in this beautiful suit, beautiful Cadillac he drove up in, beautiful white shirt, great-looking tie. I mean, the guy was dressed to the tens, and lo and behold, when he crossed his leg, there was a hole in the bottom of his shoe about the size of $50. Well, we all noticed it, but hell, none of us thought anything about it. Well, he pulled the contract out with the check, and my mother said, "No, not so fast. We got to talk about this. We've got other things to talk about." I was ready to take the check because the White Sox I knew were coming, but I didn't know if they were bringing the same amount of money. So I wanted, the bird in the hand. So bottom line is, when he left, my mother said, "How the hell could we ever sign with the Yankees? They can't even buy their damn Scout a new pair of shoes." So, the Yankees' loss became the Chicago White Sox, and then the White Sox, of course, let me go to Detroit.
It seems throughout your career, somehow you've always had the innate ability to rise to the occasion. Your first rookie game ever, you threw a no-hitter. What do you remember about that night?
Well, it was in Harlan, Kentucky. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine just called me from Harlan, Kentucky about 30 minutes ago. And not that he was a friend of mine then. I recently met this guy. But bottom line is, it was Harlan, Kentucky. It was about 1,000 people. There were more than 1,000 people at the ballpark that night, and all I knew it was like 110 in the shade. This was not my kind of pitching in a town where the sulfur was so. I mean, all you did was cough and sneeze all day long because of the coal sulfur. And all I knew is I wanted to get the hell out of there. And I threw a no-hitter the first time I pitched. And I threw a one-hitter the second time I pitched, and they got me the hell out of there. But that was some kind of town. Not only that, the second night I was there, they had a shootout in the streets. So, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Just as in your rookie league debut, in your major league debut, you had a shining moment as well. After walking your first batter ever, Mike Hirschberger, you picked him off, which was the first time you ever picked anyone off. And you also homered in your first official major league at bat.
That's right.
What do you think gave you the ability to thrive in those new? Each one of those things. Especially you were very young. What was it in you that allowed you to thrive in those type of situations?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think every Major League Baseball player comes up with a great deal of talent, God-given for sure. And, it's up to the player to take advantage of that God-given ability. Unless you played in the 90s, then you could get some steroids and HGH. And the bottom line is, we came up in good shape. We played the game real well. Fundamentally, we played the game probably better than the game was ever played before or after, because we were products of our fathers. We were products of better coaching than anybody had ever had before in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s. We were a part of that peak in the 60s that we really recognized that the game could be played at a different level. And it's not that the level in the 50s wasn't very good, or the 40s, but, the ball got quicker, the bats got better, the umpires got better, the travel got easier because of airplanes, and all of that accumulated makes for a better baseball game. When you got the coaching that we got too, I think in the minor leagues very early on, as you come out of high school, and you learn some things that are just fundamentally sound, then in fact you pick up on those pretty quick, and good things happen after that. Listen, the game is made up of fundamentals. No matter what anybody says, yep, you got to have a pretty good pair of hands. Yep, you got to be able to run a little bit. Yep, you got to understand the game. But you know what? Without talent, I don't care who you are, you can't play.
Well, since you brought it up, Denny, what is your take on the steroid report?
Well, here's my take on it, and a lot of people aren't going to be real happy with this, but anybody that can be proven, and I suppose there are a bunch of them that can be proven, anybody that can be proven, and let me talk about Clemens for just a moment.
Sure.
If somebody doesn't think that Senator Mitchell went out of his way, he did not go out of his way. Senator Mitchell probably has more integrity than 99% of the people we send to Washington every year and every couple of years. Senator Mitchell, it's like the Pete Rose thing. Does anybody really think that Major League Baseball wanted to suspend Pete Rose for life? Does anybody think they really want to suspend or go after Roger Clemens, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of the game? Hell no. But you know what? Marion Jones just got the beating of her life. Mm-hmm. She has had everything stripped out of her life. If that's what Marion Jones got, then anybody who's been found to use this stuff should be stripped of every award they've ever had. Because, number one, it was against league rules. Number two, it was illegal. You know, a lot of these guys committed felonies.
Well, that's the thing, and a lot of people don't bring that up. They point out that
people don't understand. And, boys, let me tell you something else. There's a lot of people on death row with a lot less evidence. There are thousands of people on death row with circumstantial evidence. Think about this. Roger Clemens, and we're only talking about Clemens here because there's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of other guys that use this stuff. But Roger Clemens, or the circumstantial evidence thing, a lot of guys on death row that never had anybody really testify against them except, forensic evidence. Roger Clemens has got a live human being who he was great friends with for a very long time, and not only after he got fired by the Yankees, Roger then hired the guy and put him on his own payroll.
Right.
And why in God's name would anybody believe that Pettit would come out and say he took it and this guy not name him or otherwise? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, why would he name Pettit and not Clemens, or Clemens and not Pettit? I mean, Pettit did the right thing. He stepped up and took responsibility, and I think everybody has a lot more respect for him. But on the other hand, I have a very difficult time, guys, with somebody telling me they only took 2 injections.
Well, the interesting thing is also that, no one else has come out and said, everything that this trainer has said, everyone else has they've either backed off and kind of admitted to it. No one's come out with the denial that Clemens has, the public denial, other than David Justice. Now, if you take a look at both of them, they both have something to gain monetarily from keeping their so-called images intact, because they're both out of the game.
Listen, if we believe what Halle Berry said, he had some kind of rage. I mean, he beat her up a number of times.
Right.
And let's not forget that steroids gives you some real rage, and maybe that was the problem with David Justice back then. Maybe he was on the steroid stuff, and it created all this rage in his life. Because God knows, why would you want to hit Halle Bailey? Or Halle Berry?
Right.
I mean, God, what a gorgeous woman. But I don't want to change the subject because my memory will go real quick. But the bottom line simply is there's a lot of guys that used it. I don't know how many are going to step up. I am told there's 4 or 5 investigations going around right now besides the federal and the state. I'm namely talking about newspapers and magazines. They're going to name more names. Jose Canseco now says he's going to come out and prove that A-Rod was using the stuff. Who would not believe that A-Rod was using it? I'm not saying he did, but who would not believe it? Right. I mean, God, the guy has been absolutely the greatest superstar of all time. And here's my question for everybody. Does anybody really? I will give you one interesting fact, although you guys know this. The pitching sucks in Major League Baseball. You know that, and I know that. It's mediocre and less for the most part. Yeah, a club has got a guy here or a guy there, maybe 2 guys there. But in general, the pitching really sucks. Now, let's look back in the late 60s, early 70s. pitching was still pretty good back then, especially in the early 70s, late 60s. Guys still hit 300, but they didn't hit 390. They didn't hit 50 home runs. Mm-hmm. They didn't hit 70 home runs. Boys, it's just not bad pitching. There was something going on chemically that worked. And obviously the superstars are the ones that gained the most because they had the most ability when this juice hit them and hit them in the right place.
And that's a very valid point. You go back to, you're right, you look at the pitchers right now and how mediocre, quality start is, pitching to like over a 4 ERA. But you know what? Instead of talking about today's game, I want to go to me what has to be, you take a look at baseball's magic numbers. You take a look at before, Maris's number, which now, let's not even go back there because we're going to get into the same mess. But your season, to me, was one of the most amazing seasons any professional player in any sport has ever had. 24 years old, you become Major League's biggest winner in over 37 years by winning 31 games, which now has stood for 39 years. And to me, along with I'm not so sure that DiMaggio's record would never be broken. I always thought that, Gehrig's record would never be broken. But I'm fairly sure that no one's going to approach 30 wins ever again in Major League Baseball. What do you
the chance of breaking DiMaggio's record, I think, exists because of mediocre in pitching. The mediocre pitching has got a lot to do with it. And Joe certainly faced a lot more tough pitching and secondly, tough travel than anybody will ever face again, when it comes down to travel and pitching. As far as winning 30 again, listen, a guy just won the Cy Young Award in the National League without a complete game. I don't understand it. I don't care how many games they win, but if they can't do a complete game, I don't know how you give out awards. I have such a difficult time with that. The game has changed, certainly has changed and changed in a very dramatic way. But sooner or later, somebody's got to do something for this game. And I'm talking about pitching. Pitching has got to right itself again one day, because I'll give you a prediction. All these guys, with the exception of the obvious ones, the Glavins and what's the other guy from Atlanta?
Smoltz.
Who?
John Smoltz.
John Smoltz and some of these other guys, and the guys who won close to 300 ball games. Except for those guys, think about this. What pitcher is ever going to get in the Hall of Fame? What pitcher in today's era, from the early 90s forward, with the exception of the guys we just mentioned, and there's a couple more in there too, which I just can't remember. But except for those guys, who's going to get in the Hall of Fame as a pitcher? I'll tell you what they have to do. They got to go back and put the Bert Blyleven's in. They got to put the Mickey Lolich's in. They got to put the Jack Morris's in. Those are the guys that need to get in the Hall of Fame. And to think that these guys who never complete a ball game have any chance of getting in the Hall of Fame would be a sham.
Well, the standards are certainly lower now, than they were back in your day, number-wise. But it's always tough to compare across eras.
But I do agree. It was a pure, whether it has to do with the steroids, I'm of that era. Growing up, the Tiger, I'm unfortunately a Met fan right now, but
nobody's perfect.
Exactly. But the thing is, going back into the day when you pitched, you had the Tigers, you had the Red Sox. Even in the National League, when the Giants came in, you faced Juan Marichal, Gaylord Perry. Every staff was packed. You look at your staff. It's amazing now where you look at today's third and fourth starters between the dilution because of expansion and so many teams. That fifth starter probably would have been a low AA player in your day.
Well, there were no fifth starters.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. They would have been AAA or less. But let me tell you, the toughest job that I think any major league manager has, toughest job for him every night is to sit down at his desk and say to himself, and this is hard to believe, but this is the way it is today. You just look at the box scores. Which four pitchers am I going to use tonight?
Yeah.
That's the average. Which four pitchers am I going to use tonight?
And
that tells you an awful lot of where the game has gone and the mediocrity. I mean, to think that these guys are making, we got a guy here, Bonderman, who everybody has ranted and raved for years, and I have said he's a 500 pitcher. He's got mechanic problems. He'll always be a 500 pitcher unless somebody figures out his mechanics. And he's got horrible mechanics. He gets hurt every year and everything else. Now, having said that, here's a kid that's got some pretty good ability. But on the other hand, once he gets into the fifth or sixth inning and he's got a lead, he's typical of what's going on. They start looking in the dugout for one of the three other guys who are going to relieve him that night. And if you don't pitch into the eighth or ninth inning, you're not going to win a lot of games. I don't care who you are. You're certainly there's going to be very few people who can win 20, much less 12 or 14 or 15. But when you give a guy like a Bonderman $40 million, $10 million a year for 4 years, and he is well under 500, and he hasn't had but you can count his complete games on one hand. The game is out of control, and they bitch about having to pay these guys. God, I mean, they're the guys paying them. I mean, we just gave Kenny Rogers, I think, $10 million or $8 million for this next coming year. Kenny Rogers, I don't think, and I like Kenny. Kenny's a good guy, and I would tell this to his face. I don't think Kenny can get me out.
Well, he certainly couldn't get an Atlanta Brave out with the bases loaded in a playoff game. But and then we just picked up a kid from the Miami club, the Florida Marlins, and lo and behold, we're told he's got a bat. And if you look at his statistics for the last couple of years, obviously something's going on because he's given so many more hits up and walks, which is kind of an indication that he lost his fastball and has not learned how to pitch yet. And if you don't learn how to pitch when you lose your fastball, you've got a career coming to the end. But on the other hand, they gave him $39 million, so at least he's got $39 million to find out what he can do. Yeah, $39 million is not bad for a guy with that pitched to an over 5 ERA last year. But let's go back.
Unbelievable. And just think what you just said.
I know. It's absolutely amazing. But let's go.
$39 million for an ERA of 5. Yeah, who would have ever thunk it?
Right.
After Doubleday is jumping up and throwing up in his grave tonight.
Well, you and Bob Gibson must be rolling up.
Oh, my God. I don't even want to talk to him about it. I'm going to be with him at a dinner, at the New York Writers' Dinner and the Bat Dinner next month in New York, and I can just imagine what he'll be saying about this money.
He had quite a season in '68 as well as you. He had a 112 ERA that year, and of course, the following year, Major League Baseball responded by lowering the height of the mound. How hard was that to adjust to that the following year?
Well, when they reduced the mound, they hurt a lot of us. Everybody over the next couple of years came down with sore arms. We grew up on high mounds, and we pitched on high mounds, and to take that leverage away from us, 6 inches, 8 inches in some cases, caused a great deal of strain on our arms, and a lot of us were out of the game in 3 or 4 years. The difference today is these kids grow up on flat mounds, not real high mounds, so they don't they're not losing leverage. They get in the big leagues, I think that they're gaining just a hair, not much. But that was the worst thing they've ever done to the pitchers in the game in general, was to take away that momentum.
Yeah, it did. They needed more offense. It's always about money with Major League Baseball. That's what they also. The players are saying. When steroids were good for the game, no one looked. But then all of a sudden, the public got wind of it. But let's go back to speaking of steroids. Can you imagine if Mickey Mantle had taken steroids? How many home runs he would have?
Well, you know what? We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, can you imagine Carl Yastrzemski on steroids, or Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Joe Pepitone? But I will tell you this, guys. If they were in at the time, I mean, remember this. Once you get hurt, you're trying to hang on, and you're still trying to play. Look at Kenny Rogers is the perfect example. Some of these other guys are pitching into their 40s. Somehow, some way, they've done it. But what I'm saying is, whatever elements are out there, whatever chemicals are out there, you're going to take a shot at. I mean, and I have said this. I've said this from the get-go. Thank God this stuff wasn't around when we played. There was plenty of nasty stuff around, but nothing that enhanced our ability, I don't think. We were in the era of free sex and free drugs, for God's sakes, and everywhere you went, somebody'd buy you a drink. But the bottom line was, we didn't have these enhancements and the steroids and all this other. The only thing we really had was cortisone, and they never told us the truth about cortisone until we learned about it 20 years later, when we were told how much damage it had done, because it was never a cure-all drug like we were told by the medical community. It was a drug that just took care of some inflammation, but never, ever healed an injury. And so, therefore, we were pitching while they were reducing the inflammation and the injury, we were still pitching with the injury, and all we did was compound the injury.
Yeah, that season, how many cortisones did you have shots to just get you through the World Series? It's unbelievable.
I had one every game for the World Series, and then in '69 I had 24 injections. So, once it started, it never stopped.
Yeah, you also were a Mickey Mantle fan growing up, and you actually repaid Mickey for being your idol by actually grooving a pitch to Mickey for a home run. Could you recount that for us?
Well, I won't do the whole story, but the bottom line was he was my idol growing up in Chicago. I had two idols. One was Mantle, and the other was Al Kaline. Of course, I got to play with Kaline for a number of years. And but Mickey needed one more home run to move him ahead in the all-time list, and we just worked it out between us, and finally Mickey that day that I yelled down at him. I said, after he fouled off a couple of pitches, I said, where the hell do you want to pitch? And he put his arm out over the plate, and then he hit the home run. But, those things don't happen anymore. I mean, the humor in the game isn't there anymore. The characters aren't in the game anymore. He was such a great guy, and he did so much for the game. I mean, he was baseball in the 60s. Pete Rose became baseball in the 70s and early 80s. And then you've got a slew of them from that point forward. But those two guys really represented the game well for a long time.
I could go on all night with this, and I really appreciate your time. So I don't want to keep you that much longer. So I just want to ask you a few more things.
Okay.
This wouldn't be a fair and balanced interview if I only focused on your achievements on the baseball field. A big part of the Denny McLain saga is your run-ins with the law and the time you've spent in prison. Can you tell our listeners, in your own words, what it's like at one point in your life to be adored by millions of fans, while at the absolute height of achievement, of that magical season, and then falling into the abyss and just then being another prisoner in jail?
Well, the abyss is the right word because it's dehumanizing, it's embarrassing, it's you just can't have a worse thing happen to you. Unless you lose a child, and I've lost a child too. And although nothing in the world compares to losing a child, going to jail is, everything is put on hold when you go to jail. I mean, but when you come out, everything's changed. So, I mean, you are told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and all the other things that go into it. It's nothing I can recommend to anybody. Obviously, there's a place for it in our society. I think we now have 2 million people locked up, which is way too many people in this country, especially for some of the things that they're locked up for now. Although, see, jail today is a business. All it is a ongoing business for people, and people make a lot of money in the incarceration business. And yeah, there's a place for some people, but we've allowed it to become an industry, and when that part of our society becomes an industry, then it's the wrong thing to do. And now it's way too late down the road to correct it, and it'll take a miracle for somebody to straighten it out because it is certainly out of control.
We end all our interviews here on Sports Talk New York with a real quick game of word association. I'm just going to throw out names and just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Okay, all righty.
Chuck Dressen.
Gave me my break to the major leagues. He was a great man.
Okay. Mickey Lolich.
Mickey is still thinking he's going to win 30 this year. Mickey had as much talent as anybody I've ever seen in my life. And if he had not worried about Denny McLain winning 20 or 25 or 30 every year, then Mickey Lolich would have been a multi Cy Young Award winner because Mickey Lolich had the best stuff I ever saw over 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, certainly one of the years with the Mets, that's for sure. Al Kaline.
Al is how frank do you want me to be?
You know what? After reading your book, I could count on you being frank. I know you speak your mind.
Al was a great player. Al, when there were 35 or 40,000 people in the park, Al Kaline was the best player I ever saw in the major leagues. There wasn't anybody even close to him when there were 40,000 people in the park. When there were less than 10 or 12,000 people in the park, and in the early 60s we had a lot of those, the bottom line was Al became, still he was probably the best player in the park, but Al didn't hustle. like he did when there were 40,000 people in the park. Al was all dog and pony when the ballpark was full, and didn't quite give you everything when the park wasn't full. I think that's a temperament thing.